Gold participants and listeners from around the world. I'm Kristen Schwartz, licensed midwife and MC for Gold Learning. And today I'm here with Dr. Elaine Burns, who will be presenting at the Gold Lactation Online Conference 2019. Welcome, Elaine.
Thank you.
It's so lovely to have you here today, and we're gonna speak about the presentation that you gonna have for us here at Gold. But before we get into that, our audience is quite international. We are from all over the world, so let us know, where are you located?
So I'm in Sydney, Australia, and specifically in Western Sydney.
Okay, that's wonderful. And so tell us, is it what time of the year is it now? Because I know your times are your times are different here. When you have winter, we have summer and such. So what are the temperatures outside? What kind of climate are we having there?
Yeah, it's still quite warm. We're still at the tail end of summer,
Oh,
and we're still getting 31 degrees, which may not translate to the whole of the international audience, but it's still quite hot
it's still
during the
quite hot.
day. Mm.
Okay, that's good to know. And yeah, it's so wonderful here at Go that we have an international audience. We're from all over the world. Our speakers are from all over the world, and it's so lovely just to connect and see where everybody is and what it's like over there, right?
Yeah.
All right. Before we go talk about your presentation, can you give us a little overview about your background, your professional journey, and anything you would like to share and you think our listeners should know about you?
Sure. So I started my clinical career as a registered nurse, and I worked as a registered nurse for several years before doing a midwifery degree. And I've been a midwife now for 23 years. I worked clinically for the first around 16 years of that time. I worked clinically as a midwife across all areas of midwifery. I decided that I started actually doing a research project while I was working as a clinician, and it enabled me to get an insight into what research was like, and so I ended up becoming very passionate about research and changing practice through research. So I went back to university and it did a PhD where I observed midwifery practice when supporting women who were establishing breastfeeding. It had always struck me as a clinician that this was an area that women were dissatisfied with in terms of midwifery care, whereas women often were very happy with the care they'd been provided during pregnancy and during birth. But in the postnatal period, it was an area that women seemed to be dissatisfied. So that's kind of what led me to want to explore what sorts of things we were doing and saying to women around breastfeeding support that was off-putting for women, and perhaps even creating some barriers to breastfeeding. So the other thing that sparked that interest was that I don't know if this translates across the world, but in Australia, midwives were sometimes referred to as the breastfeeding Nazis or the breastfeeding police. And so I was very interested in exploring that. And so I did the PhD, and some of those findings are what I will share during this presentation. But I also, since having observed midwifery practice in hospital environments, I've since expanded my exploration of practice and looked beyond the hospital environment to the kind of support that women receive in the community and the kind of support that women receive from peer supporters. So predominantly looking at the language that all of those practitioners use, including lactation consultants. And I've started now looking into the kind of support that is available for women who want to maintain their breastfeeding relationship after they return to work. So that's a whole other area that I'm starting to explore this year.
How wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Well, something that I found very interesting when you mentioned the midwifery care, that the women were quite happy with their prenatal care, but then the breastfeeding care, the midwives, fell short, or the women did not feel as supported with that. And then you mentioned also the midwives were considered the breastfeeding Nazis. Do you think that is, would you think that that is something depending on how midwives are educated as well, how their training is, how midwives learn?
I definitely think that it's connected to maybe not so much how they're educated, but certainly how they're the culture in the facility that they work in.
Mm,
So midwives will quite often, well, they sometimes will take on a role as being the expert,
mm,
and when they take on that role of being the expert, they can quite often be quite dogmatic in the way
mm,
that they give information. And that's not how we want to be. Of course, we want to be working in partnership with women. And so I think it can have an impact if you come at a breastfeeding interaction with that feeling of having all the knowledge
mm.
and and wanting to convince women that this is the right thing to do, and not really focusing on good communication that is actually respectful and is a two-way process
Right.
rather than the expert telling someone what they should do.
Absolutely, it's a two-way process, yeah, and it feels like if the expert tells the woman how to behave or how to be or how to, breastfeed, that is, as you said, it feels like the woman has no control or input in the whole process. And something else I notice here when I look at your title of the presentation, it's very intriguing. Liquid Gold from the Milk Bar: Health Professional Language and Practices when Providing Breastfeeding Support. And what I find interesting there, the emphasis also on the language. And something, I want to discuss with you is when we think of breastfeeding or breastfeeding support, we often think of the mechanics, right? Of the mechanics of what can we do to help this, the latch and positioning and such. But we don't really think as much about the language we're using. Is that something that you found out as well?
Absolutely. I think that was the most revealing part of the observational research that I did, was that the midwives that I observed were very kind and caring, and they really wanted to help the woman. But in doing that, and in trying to support the woman, they quite often used language which was actually disempowering
Hmm.
and disabling, and without any intention to do so. It was kind of uh, those midwives didn't even realize that they were using that language. And so when I feed back the findings from the research, quite often midwives are in the room going, oh my goodness, I say that as well, and I did never think about how
Hmm.
disempowering that language was. So it was never midwives were never doing this with intention. It
Right.
was actually just, and this is the great thing about research, I think, is that actually research, especially observational research, it almost holds up a mirror to our practice. And I myself, even in observing some of these interactions and listening to that language, I realized that I was doing some of these things myself. And it's only when you actually take a step back and observe what's happening does it become apparent that some of the language we use is disempowering.
I can't wait for your presentation. I think we all, and I speak for myself here mainly, can learn a lot from it and hopefully make sure that we are using the correct language as well with our clients because you're right. We don't want to be disrespectful or hurtful. We really want to help. And I think most healthcare providers come from that, dealing with pregnant women and nursing moms, that we really want to help. And so the last thing we want to do is use language or do anything that is disempowering or hurtful. So I think this will be a wonderful reminder that words are powerful, right? So, um, and yeah, I'm really looking forward very much to your presentation there. Quickly before I let you go, if you could just tell us what is it you hope the delegates will take away from your presentation?
I really hope that the delegates get a sort of moment where they go, aha,
Mm.
I get that. And I certainly have had that with presenting this data in other fora where people kind of, it's almost like the penny drops,
Mm-hmm.
where you kind of realize that the kind of spiel that you might have when you're talking to women is sometimes peppered with words that actually are kind of counteractive. They're not achieving the goal that you want.
Mm.
And so I really hope that delegates do get that moment of, that kind of light bulb moment that they can then take that back to their own practice
Mm-hmm.
and start to reframe some of the words that they're using. That is much going to be much more empowering and much more facilitative of that relationship development between the mother and the baby.
Oh, wonderful. Well, Dr. Elaine Burns, thank you so much for sitting down with me here today and chatting about your upcoming presentation.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to share the research in this way with an international audience.
Dr. Elaine Burns' presentation, Liquid Gold from the Milk Bar, Health Professional Language and Practices when Providing Breastfeeding Support, is a live presentation and is part of the Gold Lactation Online Conference 2019. The presentation will be live on April 23rd, but it depends where you are in the world. So make sure you check our website at goldlactation.com for more information on this presentation and on the other presentation in the conference. Thank you everyone for listening. Bye bye for now.